Hey everyone, here's a video about the great drummer Nick Fatool. And I've had a few requests to talk about Nick, and he's been one of my absolute favorite drummers since I first got into this kind of music, so of course I'm very happy to talk about him. And I just feel Nick Fatool is one of those guys, he's such a great drummer. He's one of those guys when you listen to him you think, why would I listen to anyone else? But I guess you could say that about all these guys, they're all so great. But Nick Fatool really had just a beautiful, supportive style, and you can really kind of get a sense of what was special about him and unique about him if you listen to, let's say, the recording Jam Session Coast to Coast, which is just one of the all-time great recordings, one of my absolute favorites. And half of it is the Eddie Condon Band with Cliff Lehman and George Wettling on drums. And then half is a band called the Rampart Street Paraders, a West Coast band with Nick Fatool on drums. And it's a great opportunity to compare the styles of these different drummers. And in a way, Nick Fatool is more of a laid-back player than, let's say, George Wettling. Not quite as aggressive, but I don't mean to in any way imply that he wasn't a hard swinging player, because he absolutely was, but just more of a laid back feel and just a relaxed feel. He also had a lot of humor in his playing. He would just throw in different things, little cowbell figures and different things where you can tell he was having a good time, just messing around. But really on those recordings you could hear the difference in his approach. And in a way, the Rampart Street Paraders, who was one of just the all-time great bands, in a way, the Rampart Street Paraders and the Eddie Condon Band are kind of two sides of the same coin, I think. There's a lot of similarities, but also a lot of differences in their approach. When you hear them back to back, you can really hear it. Nick Fatool, where George Wettling, of course, is coming right out of Baby Dodds, I always felt that Nick Fatool kind of was coming out of Ben Pollock. And I think that makes sense because Ben Pollock, who is also one of the great drummers of all time, he eventually started fronting his own band, and he got Ray Baduke to play drums. And when that band broke up, or some of the guys left that band, they ended up going with Bob Crosby. So Ray Baduke was, of course, famous for playing in the Bob Crosby band. And then other guys like Matty Matlock and Eddie Miller, they left that band, and then later on they formed the Rampart Street Paraders. And it's just one of the classic bands throughout the 50s. They made a ton of different recordings. They did the soundtrack to the movie Pete Kelly's Blues. They made many different recordings, often under the name the Rampart Street Paraders, but sometimes under different names. But all of it is fantastic, and I really feel there's sort of a link between Ben Pollock, Ray Baduke, Nick Fatool. There's a certain similarity that goes through there. And another thing that set Nick Fatool apart was his cymbal setup, especially what he was playing in the 50s. He usually would have a ride cymbal with rivets and a Chinese cymbal with rivets, or a swish cymbal, and a hi-hat. And usually that was it. And sometimes he would have this kind of setup with the Chinese cymbal on his left and the ride cymbal in the regular spot. Jake Hanna also used that same setup with Woody Herman in the 60s. And then sometimes he would keep the ride cymbal here and have the Chinese cymbal further over to his right. But either way, he would have those two cymbals with rivets, and it gave him this beautiful, smooth legato sound, and just a beautiful blend to all of his cymbal notes. And you can really hear those rivets ring out and sustain. You'll really hear, let's say when he crashes the Chinese cymbal and then goes to the hi-hat, you'll hear it ring out for a couple of bars in the background. It just makes a really nice, smooth transition. And he would love to play, he would ride on the Chinese cymbal, but he'd also do a lot of crashes on it. In different ways. On slower tunes, he would sometimes crash, a light crash, I mean not even really a crash, but just a note on 2 and 4 on the Chinese cymbal. Because of the rivets, it would ring out. And another great recording, I'll talk more about some recordings of Nick Fatool to check out, but Coast Concert, not to be confused with Jam Session Coast to Coast, but Coast Concert by Bobby Hackett and Jack Teagarden. On there, you'll hear him play so just letting that riveted Chinese cymbal ring out on 2 and 4 is a really nice effect. And one of my favorite things that Nick Fatool would do often with the Chinese cymbal is he would crash it on beat 2 after a fill or a solo. So most players, they're going to crash a cymbal. Often they'll crash it on beat 1, coming out of a fill. A lot of the guys back in the day do a crash on beat 4. Later on, guys sometimes make the and of 4. But Nick Fatool, I always thought this was so hip. He would play his fill through the downbeat and then crash afterwards. It's a really great effect, and not a lot of guys do it, but he did it a lot. You can hear him do it on a lot of recordings. I always thought that was really cool. And for hi-hats, at that time in the 50s, I also want to say, I think he was so into the rivet sound that I even remember seeing a photo of him in one of the old Zildjian cymbal setups catalogs, where he was using a cymbal and he just had his keychain resting on the bell of the cymbal, so that would give him a rivet kind of effect because the keys would bounce on the cymbal. Maybe he was using a cymbal that wasn't drilled for rivets, so he just did that in the studio. But then he would use these big hi-hats, like 15-inch hi-hats. These are 13s. But he would play a lot on the closed hi-hat, more than a lot of guys. Very interesting, especially in the 50s and 60s. Guys like Wetling or Cliff Lehman would play the closed hi-hat behind bass solos and sometimes a piano solo, once in a while a clarinet. But Nick Fatool would really play the closed hi-hat behind, lots of horn solos. And it was interesting because it's the opposite kind of sound as these rivet cymbals he was playing, a tight sound. But he got such a beautiful sound out of the closed hi-hat, and he could play it chorus after chorus without it getting monotonous, which I think is an incredible skill. He could do that on the cymbals as well, which is very impressive. And I think it's even harder to do on the closed hi-hat. I think it's harder to make that sound beautiful, chorus after chorus. But he could really do that, and he wasn't afraid to just sort of play the same groove for a while. And he would maybe throw in, little subtle accents with his left hand. And he would also do a lot of offbeat bass drum accents. So he would throw those little things in there, sort of give it a little spice. And he played a lot of double strokes. Another thing I always thought was very interesting about him, some of the other guys I've talked about did more single strokes, and of course Nick Fatool did that also, but he had a lot of things he would do with double strokes. Just this kind of thing. Or maybe my favorite recording of his is one with Matty Matlock. Matty Matlock and his Dixiemen. Dixieland USA is the name of the recording. I don't come up with these titles, but it's one of the absolute great jazz recordings and a great place to hear Nick Fatool just do everything that made him so great. And you'll hear him play little double stroke fills on that. Like that kind of things, little double stroke fills. He would play them sometimes in his breaks or solos. That kind of thing. That was similar, not exact, but that was similar to a great tag that he plays on Big Butter and Eggman from that recording Coast Concert. So those are some things he would do with double strokes, and he would leave space in his solos. And a thing he would do a lot, it was a great effect, is when he would start a break, he would leave some space, maybe the first part of the break there'd be some space, and then he'd fill it up more in the second half of the break. So he might do things like that kind of thing, or these kinds of things. And what you really got to listen for, though, are the subtleties that he gets. All of these things he would play, he would get so many different sounds between playing different parts of the head of the snare drum, different rim shots, and then playing on the rim. And he would sort of combine all of those very subtly. He'd also play a lot of rim shots on toms. You know, so you get these kinds of things going on. Just really check out the subtleties that you would get with that, because it's a beautiful thing. And also, another thing that I think was so interesting about his playing, and again on Coast Concert, you can hear this very well, because half of Coast Concert is with a banjo and a tuba, and half of it is with bass and guitar. And in traditional jazz, there are all these rules about different things you're supposed to do, and this is how you play with a tuba, and this is how you play with a bass. And it's just interesting, because when I first heard these recordings as a teenager, I noticed that he was pretty much playing the same way, regardless. It's not that you have to do that. Some guys would change more, but I just always thought that was cool, and it sounds great, and it totally works. And just like all these guys back then, they weren't thinking about rules. They were doing the stuff that someone else later on tried to make a rule out of, but they were just playing. And I always liked that Nick Fatool, you know, he would break all these rules. He would play a ride cymbal with a tuba, or then he'd be playing with more of a mainstream swing band, and he'd throw in little cowbell licks and things. So he was just sort of, like, I think, doing his thing, and again, making it work in all these different contexts. And I talked about Maury Feld doing that, and it's just interesting, because Maury Feld and Nick Fatool are so different. They're so different. Their sound is different, and Maury Feld is a much more aggressive, technical drummer, and they're both great, and they both make their style work in so many different settings, but they're so different. So it's another, I think, just great thing about all these players, how they could do that. That was something for sure with Nick Fatool that I always noticed and was impressed with. So let's see, I mentioned Jam Session Coast to Coast and Coast Concert and Matty Matlock and his Dixie Men. Those are all great. Also, one of my favorite recordings that Nick Fatool did is with Bing Crosby and the Bob Scobie Band, called Bing with a Beat. That's definitely one to check out. Just Nick Fatool's intro on Let a Smile Be Your Umbrella. Classic. Also, a great recording by Jess Stacy and the Famous Sidemen. This was sort of a salute to Benny Goodman, playing a lot of those tunes and arrangements, Don't Be That Way, Sing, Sing, Sing. And it's incredible to hear Nick Fatool playing those. Of course, Nick Fatool played in Benny Goodman's band, but again, his style and approach is so different from Gene Krupa's, and with a lot of those classic arrangements, again, like Don't Be That Way or Sing, 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 it's very different when you hear other drummers, even great drummers, playing those charts, because Gene is so associated with them. There are so many things that Gene did on those tunes that kind of became part of the arrangement, which in a way you kind of have to do, or you should do, but then in another way, you don't want to just copy what Gene Krupa did. So finding that balance is really difficult. And I think that Nick Fatool just did it incredibly. He does little tips of the hat to different things that Gene played, but he makes it his own, and it's just a great approach to that material. And often when I'm in a band, a big band where we're playing some of those charts, as much as I'm thinking about Gene Krupa, who of course is very much at the forefront of my mind, I'm also thinking about Nick Fatool and the way he approached those. I just think it was a very hip and supportive way of playing that material. So those are just some thoughts and examples about Nick Fatool. Again, just listen to those recordings, and if you have any questions, just let me know. And yeah, and I'll be back soon, hopefully do some more videos. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon. Thanks.